My name is Graeme Adamson, and I have the honour to be the coordinator for Ageing with Expectation, or AWE, or for short. We are presenting a very interesting topic for you in May. It's one that I think I've thought about a few times and never come up with a good answer. Maybe I'll get some answers today. The topic is, if I had to do it all over again. Now, how many times have we all thought about that? Anyway, that's the topic between Dr. Francis Macnab and Dr. Steven Koski. And without any further ado, I shall hand over to the two gentlemen to take you through that little bit of a challenge. Over to you.
Thanks, Graeme. Thanks very much. And Francis, great to see you again. I came across this, I'm not sure who wrote this. It says that it was just a person who was 95 years old and said, if I had my life to live over again, I'd dare to make more mistakes next time. I'd relax, I would limber up, I'd be a whole lot sillier than I have been on this trip. I would take fewer things seriously. I would take more chances. I would climb more mountains, swim more rivers. I'd eat more ice cream and less beans. I would perhaps have more actual troubles, but I'd have fewer imaginary ones. You see, I'm one of those people who live sensibly and sanely, hour after hour, day after day. Oh, I've had my moments. And if I had to do it over again, I'd have more of those moments. In fact, I'd try to have nothing else, just moments, one after another, instead of living so many years ahead of each day. I've been one of those persons who never goes anywhere without a thermometer, a hot water bottle, a raincoat, a parachute. If I had to do it over again, I would travel a whole lot lighter than I have. And she finishes, if I had my life to live over again, I would start barefoot earlier in the spring and stay that way later in the fall. I'd go to more dances, I'd ride more merry-go-rounds, and I'd pick more daisies. So what do you think about this idea as you reflect on if you had your life to live over again?
I think we all tend to say, if I had my life to live over again, I'd be different, as she was saying. But in fact, we tend to repeat the same things. We do it all over again, the same thing. I'm doing it the same way as I always did it, probably because that's all we know. But I think that's one thing we need to take account of, that we tend to repeat the patterns we know will fail. We tend to repeat the patterns that we've always followed. And we say, that's the way I always did it. That's the way my mother did it. That's the way my mother told me I should do it, and so on. So the repetition bug gets into us, and we keep repeating ourselves.
Well, I'm curious though. I completely agree with you. We are creatures of habit, and there's this saying that said, I was walking down the street and there was a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fell in, and I yelled and I complained and I blamed who put this hole in the sidewalk. And it took me forever to get out. And the next day I was walking down the sidewalk and there was a deep hole and I fell in. I fell in again. And again, who put this hole in there? And I shook my fist and I blamed whoever put this hole in the sidewalk. It took me forever to get out. The third time I walked down the sidewalk, there's a deep hole. I fell in. But this time I cried out for help, and somebody was there and reached down and picked me up. The fourth day, I walked down the sidewalk. There was a deep hole in the sidewalk, and I walked around it. And the fifth day, I walked down a different street. So I'm wondering if it is possible to walk down a different street. And I'm really curious about this idea of, you know, spending some time thinking about, well, what would I do differently if I had to do it all over again? Because I'm wondering if we really thought about, well, what are those things I might do differently? We might actually approach each day a little differently. There was a study out of I think it was the University of Wisconsin, that asked 1,000 people over the age of 90, if you had your life to live over again, what would you do differently? And I'm really intrigued by the top 4 answers. And I'd love to spend some time reflecting on each one with you, because I'm wondering if we thought about each answer, whether it might influence how we live today. Because the only day we have is today. What did Leo Tolstoy say? The only power you have is right now. You might wish yesterday was better. You might hope tomorrow's going to be better, but it's today where you have power. So those 4 things. So they asked over 1,000 people over the age of 90, what would you do if you had your life to live over again? And I'd like to take one at a time. So the fourth most popular answer was, I'd take more risks. I would live less cautiously. I love to ask the question, when's the last time you did something for the first time? So what do you think about this idea of living with a sense of maybe too much caution and not enough risk?
Too much caution? I don't know. Do you live that way? For the most part, I live without thinking about it too much. It's only in retrospect, I wish I'd thought about this in a different way. But in the event at the moment, there it is. That's how it happens. So it's not always easy to say I would have done it differently, because we often keep repeating patterns we know are the same things as yesterday. Patterns we know maybe will fail, but we'll fail again and again. And so it goes on. In fact, we can be very boring as we go on repeating ourselves.
It's interesting that there was a study done, I don't know how they evaluated it. I think, I don't know how you evaluate happiness, but it was evaluating contentment, happiness, quality of life. And what the study discovered, that those who had a higher quotient of happiness, a higher quality of life, they more often tried new things. So they would start new hobbies. They would take up, for example, watercolor, never tried that before in their life, that all of a sudden they go to a watercolor class. Or pickleball I don't know if pickleball is the rage in Australia. Pickleball is the absolute rage in America. So all of these people who no longer have the knees to be able to play tennis or sport like they used to, but pickleball is something that you don't have to move around as much. And all of a sudden they're trying this new game, and they're being mobile and active. So where before they used to be a little bit cautious, and they did what they did. They followed patterns, they followed routines. But the study says those who actually do something they've never done before. As I said, when's the last time you did something for the first time? What they find, what this study found is those folks seemed happier, seemed more content, seemed to have more energy, more zest for life.
You mean the people who had more, the ones who had more zest were people who were doing things for the first time, or were repeating things that they knew would bring happiness or bring satisfaction?
Well, the study found that those who are actually doing things for the first time, like for example, maybe all your life you've wanted to take a watercolor class and learn how to paint with watercolors. And so you do it. Or maybe all your life you've wanted to learn how to swing dance. I don't know what it is. So you do it. You take a new class. So you try something new. You step out and you take a risk. And what they found is those folks seem to be happier.
You mean the people who took risks were happier?
Yeah.
I know people who take risks and are frightened.
Yeah.
They're frightened of what's going to happen. They're frightened of the outcome. So they talk about, I'm a risk taker, but they don't take the risks because they're frightened of what the outcome might be. What about that?
Well, that really relates to the next one. You know, the study where they asked the question of 1,000 people over 90, if you had your life to live over again, what would you do differently? And the next one was, I would worry less. So I would worry less about those risks. And what I heard in that is I'd spend less time imagining what might happen and worrying about what might happen or may not happen, and I would just do it.
But would you? What we say we would do and what we really do are frequently very different. We say, oh yeah, I'll take the risk. But when it comes to the punchline, we don't take that risk. If you don't mind, I'll play this safe. I'll be safe. We prefer safety to risk.
And my curiosity here is how can we encourage one another to take those risks? I mean, when I grew up, my mother would always tell me when I'm going out the door, be careful. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if she would have said, be brave today. So it's like we learn this idea like, oh, we need caution, we need to be careful. And obviously there's some wisdom there as well. But I wonder what would happen if I had, and if we had, and if we encouraged one another, be brave today. What's one brave thing that you can do today? There was a marvelous movie. What was it called? It was called I Bought a Zoo. And there's a line in this movie that says, sometimes all you need is 20 seconds of insane courage. And well, what the movie is about is 20 seconds of insane courage. This person bought a zoo. But in buying the zoo, it changed his life. So it's that idea of rather than choosing comfort, can you choose courage? Because both paths are hard. The comfortable path is hard in its own way, and the courageous path is hard. And I think it's trying to figure out choosing the right kind of hard. The kind of hard that will kind of release a sense of life in us. Because I think sometimes just always choosing the comfortable path kind of deadens the life inside of us. What do you think?
Well, you're giving fairly stark alternatives. Can we have some midway house? Can we have something that's not quite so this or that, with a little bit of this and a little bit of that? Is the way we want to live, I think. Give me a little bit of the cake, but not the whole cake.
I like that. I like that. I think there's some wisdom there. I think if I lived my life constantly with 20 seconds of insane courage, I'd end up divorced, probably, and in a whole lot of trouble. So yeah, I think it is that balance between knowing when it's wise to be cautious, but knowing when choosing to be brave leads us to life.
But again, there's your contrast that you're taking. Let's say we took different contrasts. You said, either I do this or that. Supposing we step over the either or and say we have a little bit of both. And so we have a little bit of fun, a little bit of seriousness, a little bit of really good stuff, a little bit of mad stuff. What do you say to that?
I would say balance is probably a really good thing. And I'm curious, when they asked the question in the study, of the 1,000 people over the age of 90, what would you do if you had your life to live over again? They said they would worry less. And I'm wondering in some ways whether they were talking about all of the ruminations that go on in our minds. One of the most marvelous documentary I've seen is Tim McCartney Snape Australian? I think he might be Australian. He was the first person to climb Mount Everest without oxygen.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And he did this, there was this documentary of this climb. And it was, to me, it was so profound, because his wife at the time was his expedition doctor. So she was back at base camp while he was almost at the peak. And he had a film attached to his helmet, and he was talking. It was for National Geographic. And I mean, he was facing these crevices that if one tiny slip and he would fall into this crevice, this bottomless crevice, and die. But because of the weather, the communications between his wife and he were faulty. They stopped working. So the wife was going out of her mind with worry, wondering what's going on because she hadn't heard from her husband. And he said something that's always stuck with me. So he's up near the top of Mount Everest, climbing inch by inch by inch. And he said, I think this climb is significantly harder on my wife than on me, because all I have in front of me is reality. And I'm just trying to go step by step. She has her imagination. And 9 times out of 10, what you imagine is generally worse than reality. And that's always kind of stuck with me. And I think that's maybe what they're saying in that study is I would spend less time imagining the worst.
Imagining the worst. What about imagining the best? What's the best thing that can happen to us? Why do we choose the fear, if you like, or the anxiety of the worst when we could choose all the excitement of the best? So supposing we choose the best, come on board, choose the best, choose life, rather than the anxiety that we often gather around life. Choose life in its big panorama, rather than the narrow field of our worry. We tend to choose the anxiety. Odd, isn't it? When in fact we would really like to live on the big screen, live on the big mountaintop.
I think you're so right. And I think that's why this idea of intrigues me about reflecting on if I had to live my life over again. So if I could identify, well, I spent a lot of time worrying. How can I shift that? I spent a lot of time imagining the worst case scenario. How can I choose life? I love the poem. I think I've shared this poem before by Mary Oliver. It's called "I Worried." Do you remember that one?
Go ahead.
Where she said, I worried a lot. I worried a lot. Will the garden grow? Will the river flow in the right direction? Will the earth turn as it was taught? And if not, how shall I correct it? Was I right? Was I wrong? Will I be forgiven? Can I do better? Will I ever be able to sing? Even the sparrows can do it. And I am, well, hopeless. Is my eyesight fading, or am I just imagining it? Am I going to get rheumatism, lockjaw, dementia? Finally, I saw that worrying had come to nothing, and I gave it up. And I took my old body and went out into the morning and sang. I love that.
The only trouble is that the neighbour lifted up the window and said, "Would you shut up? Would you go back to bed? We've heard enough of that." So there's always a downside.
Yeah, especially if I'm the one singing. Yeah, for sure. Well, that study, they said, okay, if you had to live your life over again, what would you do differently? They said, I think I'd take more risks. I'd live less cautiously. They said, I would worry less. And then the second most popular answer is they said, I would forgive more easily. I would invest more in my relationships. I would not spend so much time holding on to grudges. Yeah. What do you think?
I'd spend more time being alive. I'd spend more time enjoying the moment. I spend more time being with people I really wanted to be with. Well, that's the dream. That's the image we have. We'd like to think we do that. But the reality is that we tend to keep on repeating the ugly scenes, the unpleasant moments. We want to go back over it again, see if we can sort it out. Well, in fact, we probably would be better to say, let's leave that. Supposing we leave it. We made a mistake. Let's leave that. And now go on to something else. Rather than go back over it, say, I'll try and correct it. Can't do it. I'll do it again. I'll try again. We can make ourselves miserable trying to do over again what we did badly, poorly last time.
I think that is so wise. Sometimes we forget there's no such thing as perfect. sometimes I think we forget there's no such thing as perfect people. There's no such thing as perfect relationships. And we all make mistakes. And rather than continuing to go over and over and over again those mistakes we made, or continuing to revisit those wounds that either we caused or that were caused to us, I think sometimes it is helpful to just accept we're all human, and time is short, and time is precious, and this is the day we have. I know you, as well as I, have spent a lot of time with people at the end of their lives, when they are nearing breathing their last. More often than not, what I'm listening to, what I'm hearing, is people talking about their relationships. And they're not talking about their cars, they're not talking about their vacations, they're not talking about their homes. They're talking about people. And expressing gratitude for the love that they have received and the love that they've been able to give. And when I hear regrets, if there are any regrets, it's often, I wish I would have loved more.
I like to encourage people to talk about their relationships when they said, do you remember, and they're talking about something that was really good, really funny, really remarkably humorous. Do you remember the time when such and such happened? And we laugh and say, yeah, you made an idiot of yourself, remember? So you say, oh, did I? So we do that. We try to avoid, or we tend to avoid even the good spots by saying, oh, don't tell me about that. Don't remind me. Yeah, remind me of the good points. Remind me of the humor. Remind me of the joyful moments. Are there any?
Well, I was just reminiscing just the other day about when I first arrived in Australia, and you took me to the Athenaeum Club. I think it was the Athenaeum Club, and we'll just say I lacked a little sophistication at this stage in my life. I didn't even have a tie. I didn't even have a tie to put on, so we had to go find myself a tie. And we're sitting at this really elegant table, and the butter dish, the butter dish was passed along. And so not only did I take a little bit of butter, I then used the little knife that you're then supposed to pass along to spread the butter on my on my bread. And you gave me the swiftest elbow. So thank you for the culturing that you gave me. I still laugh at that moment.
But notice that you and I both remember that moment.
Yeah.
When in fact we had plenty of other very different, joyous moments in which good things happened. But we tend to go back to, do you remember the time when you made an ass of yourself, when you said something terrible, when you did this? Rather, do you remember the time when it was really good? It was fun. It was a pleasure to be there. There were those moments too.
Yeah.
And we had them.
It seems like gratitude is so important. I think it was Ira Brock who does a lot of palliative care work. And I think he wrote a book where he talks about the four most important things to say in the dying process, I guess. And I can't even remember what the four. I think it's forgive me, I forgive you, I love you. But the fourth one is thank you. And he talks about how important gratitude is to our peace. I often say a grateful heart is a peaceful heart, is a loving heart. And I often think that part of the art of living is to hold our grief in one hand, and there's a lot to grieve, and hold our gratitude in the other hand, and to allow both to expand our hearts, to make our hearts bigger. I think it was Soren Kierkegaard who said, it takes courage to grieve, but it takes a special kind of courage to be grateful in the midst of your grief. And I'm wondering if part of that's what these folks are talking about in this survey, is the importance of just being grateful, but also being grateful for the people in our life.
Yes, I remember well one person saying he's been given many things in life, but he wanted one thing more. He prayed a prayer which said, grant me one thing more, a grateful heart. So although he had many things, don't forget, he said, there's one thing more, a grateful heart.
I will never forget when I visited the Philippines, when I lived in Australia, and Laurie was the director of an inter-country adoption agency. And so we traveled throughout this is when I lived in Adelaide, and we traveled throughout all Southeast Asia. And we were in Manila, and we were staying at a Catholic convent because they also had an orphanage, but it was right next to Smoky Mountain, which was this huge garbage dump. And where people lived on the edges because they spent their days going through the garbage, trying to find things to eat and then valuable things to sell. And we were guests. We were guests of this convent. Because we were guests, we were honored. And there was this man who gave me this beautiful flowered necklace. He just gave it to me with just this. He exuded this joy as he gave me this necklace. And I found out later that was probably worth about 2 weeks of wages for him to give me the gift, this gift, this stranger. I was a stranger. And I couldn't help but think that not only was I grateful for this gift, but I really desired whatever was in that man's heart that gave him the freedom to be able to give it so freely and so joyously.
So where will we go from there, do you think? Where do we take our gratitude? What do we do with it? Do we just hold it within ourselves? Or does it become an expression of our life out there? How can we allow gratitude within to become an expression of, what do we say, of the goodness of life out there? Otherwise it becomes only something within us. So we open ourselves to gratitude's gift, the gift of being able to give something back outwardly for others.
I think that is so important. And I wonder if it links back to I'd take more risks. Like, well, maybe one thing we can do is take the risk of expressing gratitude that we're holding back. Maybe it's writing that note to someone. Maybe it's picking up the phone and saying, I really appreciate you. You've really made a difference in my life. Somebody send me a message. It's the simple things. Somebody sent me a message this afternoon, just telling me how important the message I delivered this morning was to him. and how it was, kind of just what he said. He said it was just what he needed to hear. And then he went on to describe in a specific way of something I shared, how something shifted for him inside. Now, he took the time to write a message of gratitude to me, but I can't even begin to tell you what a difference that made to my day. So I'm wondering, sometimes maybe that's what we can do, is we can take more risks and letting the people around us know how much we appreciate them.
Yes, we sometimes forget that they have feelings too. They would like to hear something back from us. We sometimes forget that we can make something, do something, say something, and make a big difference to their lives. Just by a word.
Yeah.
Just by 2 words. Not very much. But they remember it. How often do you hear people say, I remember the time we were walking along and you said such and such. You can't even remember it. It was so insignificant to you, or you'd long since forgotten it. But he or she, they remembered. It was important to them.
So I'm curious if you thought, even the people listening to this, thought of, well, who are the 5 people in your life that have influenced you? Who are the 5 people in your life that have impacted you? Who are the 5 people in your life that in some way have just made a difference? And what would it be like to write each of them a note today and just simply say, thank you?
Or going a little bit beyond that point of writing them a note and saying, I forgot to say sorry. I do feel sorry for what happened. I didn't say it, but now I will say it. It makes a huge difference to be able to say, I was wrong. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's what Ira Brock was getting at, where he said, say, forgive me, say, thank you, and say, I love you. I think that's what they're getting at in the study, of where they said, if I had to live my life over again, I would forgive more easily. I would put more emphasis on relationships, and particularly the relationships I take for granted.
Not only relationships, there are other good experiences that come our way. That was very precious, that experience, that moment, that walk that we took. We sometimes forget to pause and say, they were good moments. So we're so busy getting that, moving there, going over there. But to pause for a moment and say, here was a good moment. Let me treasure it. Let me take it for a moment. Let me hold it there. For it was a good moment to be alive to that moment.
Yeah, I keep going back to Abraham Heschel, who said this goal of the spiritual life is to live in radical amazement, taking nothing for granted. So rather than asking each other, well, what did you do today? How much did you accomplish today? What did you produce today? What did you achieve today? How fast did you go today? Did you win today? Instead, what if we asked, what did you notice today? What took your breath away today? What brought you joy today? Whose life did you lift up today? I sit at my desk. I sit at this very desk on Friday mornings, purposefully. I work on my message for Sunday, Friday mornings at 7 a.m. purposefully, because what I hear at 7 a.m. every Friday morning is the garbage truck honking at my 5-year-old next door neighbor. So at 7 a.m. every Friday morning, Ronan is his name. Ronan goes out on the step to wait for the garbage truck driver. And his name's Jamie. And I only know his name is Jamie because Ronan, the 5-year-old, told me that's my friend Jamie. And the garbage truck honks and Ronan waves. And I run to the window because I want to see the joy in not only Ronan's face, but Jamie's face as well. And I think, well, so maybe life isn't only in those big milestones and finish lines. Maybe it's in those beautiful moments of a garbage truck driver bringing joy to a 5-year-old. Maybe that's what it's about.
So it's really a matter of not only what I get from this day, this moment, this experience, but what I bring to it, what I give to it, what is there that I share with somebody else. Possible, important.
Which brings us, interestingly enough, so 1,000 people were asked over the age of 90, what would they do if they had their life to live over again? The most popular response really surprised me. But the most popular response is exactly what you just said, that they would invest their lives in those things that would live on. They would invest more in the next generation. They would plant trees knowing they're not going to be the ones to be able to sit under the shade of that tree. It will be their grandchildren and their grandchildren. And so what it suggested is that when you only focus on yourself, you just grow old. But when you focus on your grandchildren, or just children in general, the next generation, you become an elder. You become a sage elder. And the suggestion was the world has enough old people. The world needs more elders. The world needs more sages.
Good point. So how do we do this? How do we ensure that more people see that life is there to be shared, to be spread around, to be the good things of life are not only something for ourselves within, but the good things of life are there to be spread wider and wider. Makes a world of difference.
You know, one of my biggest regrets is by the time I was wise enough to want to listen to my dad tell stories, his dementia had set in and he wasn't able to tell those stories. And sometimes I think the greatest gift people could possibly give is to maybe sit down and record stories. Who were the influences in your life? What difficult moments did you go through and how did you overcome those moments? What are you most proud of? What makes you laugh? What makes you cry? What's most important to you? I think it would be a beautiful thing for grandparents, doesn't have to be grandparents, but just say grandparents, to record the stories of their lives for their grandchildren, or to write their grandchildren a letter. Here's what I want you, here's what I most want you to know about me and my life, and here's my best wish for you. I think that would be an amazing gift.
Now, in all that you said just now, you used one word, many words, but one word in particular was moments. To grab hold of the moments, this moment, that moment, the good moment, and to recognize them as so very important and so very enriching. The moments. Life is only moments, one after the other. But if we can make some of the moments come alive, moments can make a world of difference to your life, mine, his, hers, every moments. Somebody said they're only moments. But how do you interpret the word only? Only can be interpreted as being a very little bit, or they can be interpreted as being everything. Only moments. They make life so different. Just moments. Excellent.
Well, as always, thanks so much for the conversation. I will continue to think about, if I had to live my life over again, what would I do differently? Recognizing, but it's this moment that matters the most. And the next moment, and the next moment.
These moments.
Yeah.
For me, these moments, the moments of friendship, the moments of remembering, the moments of hoping, the moments of joy. Treasure them. We do. So thank you.
Well, thank you. These moments that I'm able to spend with you each month are an absolute gift that I treasure. And you have had a profound and continue to have a profound impact in my life. And I really, really appreciate you. So thank you.
You say such good things, and I thank you. We'll talk again.
I look forward to it.
Very good. Goodbye for now.
Well, folks, what a very enlightening and illuminating conversation between two very fine men. And I thank you both for it. Looking back on it, I think that the beginning of the conversation set the scene very, very nicely. We wish to be different, was the note I made, but we tended to repeat our existing patterns. Now, I was thinking about it while you were talking, and yes, I think I do just that. I like the 4 major points: to take more risks, to worry less, in other words, just do it, to forgive more easily and invest our lives in something that will live on. That is, I think, what we do or try to do with our grandchildren, actually, children and grandchildren. I think all those 4 are, in fact, just facets of one thing, but I can't put a name on that one thing is. However, remember the moments, and remember that the main moment is the moment of now. Thank you all for being with us for our May presentation of awe. We will be back again in June, on the first Friday of June. And until then, I wish you all a happy reminiscing. Bye now.